Welcome back to Dirty Laundry, the channel where we air out the secrets families try hardest to hide. Because every family has a basket of it, folded up and pushed to the back of the closet. The betrayals, the quiet greed, the things people say about you the moment they think you can't hear them anymore. Today's story comes from a man who learned the hard way that the people who say, "I love you," the fastest, are sometimes the ones already measuring your house for sale. If you have ever wondered what your own children would do if they thought you were dying and rich, this one is going to stay with you. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and before we begin, do an old man a favor and hit that subscribe button, because the truth he uncovered is one nobody saw coming. Here is his story, told in his own words. 7 months after I buried my wife, a doctor told me I was going to die. He was a careful man. Dr. Reyes, perhaps 40, the kind of physician who chooses his words the way a good engineer chooses his torque settings. No more force than the job requires. He did not soften it, and he did not crush me with it. He simply turned the screen so I could see the scans, and he said the word that ends a man's whole life in 2 syllables: cancer, stage 4. He said it had spread, and he said it quietly. And he said he was sorry. What I remember most is not the word. It is my own hands. I have spent my whole life depending on these hands. For 30 years, they held a steering wheel at speeds where 1/10 of a second of tremor would have killed me, and they never once shook. Not at the start line at Monaco with 200,000 people screaming. Not in the rain at Spa when the car ahead of me went into the barrier and I threaded the wreckage at 180 miles an hour. My hands were the steadiest thing about me. They were the last thing I trusted when everything else had failed. And sitting in that small, bright room, looking at the scan of my own body lit up with something that should not have been there, my hands began to shake. I held them out in front of me, these 2 old companions, and I watched them tremble. And I thought, so this is how it ends. Not in a corner at 300 kilometers an hour. In a chair. In a paper gown. Watching my own hands betray me. My name is Vincent Castellano. Some of you, the ones with gray in your hair like mine, may remember it. 2 world championships, a long time ago, when the cars were heavier and the men who drove them did not always come home. I made my money on the track, and I made more of it after. The way men do when the world decides your name is worth something. $58 million. By the last count my accountant gave me. Though I confess I stopped caring about the number years ago. Money was never why I drove. I drove because there is a kind of silence you can only find at the edge of disaster. A place where the noise of the whole world drops away and there is nothing left but you and the machine and the next corner. These days I run a driving academy out near Sonoma Raceway, in the wine country north of San Francisco. I teach young people who have the gift, the ones with quick hands and quiet nerves. I do not need the money it brings, which is almost none. I do it because a man has to have a reason to get up in the morning. And after Eleanor died, teaching those kids was the only reason I had left. Eleanor, my wife of 40 years. She had been a race engineer when I met her, one of the only women in the paddock in those days, and she could read a car's heartbeat through her fingertips on the chassis better than any man I ever knew. She used to slip a card into my bag before every race, the same 2 words in her sharp handwriting every time: onward, She died 7 months before that doctor turned his screen to me, and the house we had filled for 4 decades had gone silent in a way I did not have words for. I drove home from the clinic the long way, along the road that winds between the vineyards, because I was not ready to walk into that quiet house and be a dying man in it. On the seat beside me was a note I had scribbled that morning, a reminder to call my granddaughter Lily, Sienna's girl, 16 years old and the only one of them who still came to the garage just to sit with me. I looked at her name on that scrap of paper, and something in my chest cracked open. When I finally got home, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and I made 3 phone calls. I called my eldest son, Marcus, 38, an investment manager down in Los Angeles. I called my daughter, Sienna, 35, who does public relations and is Lily's mother. I called my youngest, Dominic, 32, who has never quite found his footing in the world. I told each of them, in the plainest words I could manage, that I was sick, that it was serious, that the doctors did not give me long. And here is the thing that I did not understand that night. All 3 of them said the same thing. Not similar things. The same thing. Word for word. Almost to the breath. Dad, I'm coming home right away. I love you. At the time, it warmed the cold place in my chest. I sat there in the dark, and I let myself believe, for a few hours, that I was a man who was loved. But a driver learns, over 30 years, to read patterns, to feel the small wrongness in a car a full lap before the data shows it. And somewhere underneath the comfort, in the part of me that had kept me alive at speed for 3 decades, a quiet voice was already speaking. 3 children, 3 identical answers, within the same single hour. People who are surprised do not all say the same words. People who have rehearsed do. I did not listen to that voice that night. God help me. I wanted too badly to be loved, but it had spoken. And once a thing like that is spoken, you cannot fully unhear it. That was the first warning. I missed it. I would not miss the second. I do not remember the rest of the drive home. I remember only that the house was waiting for me the way an empty racetrack waits at dawn, silent and full of ghosts. Eleanor and I had bought it 20 years ago, a low stone place set into the hillside with the vineyards rolling away below and the garage out back where I kept the cars that mattered. She had chosen it for the light. I had chosen it for her. Now I walked through rooms that still smelled faintly of her, and I sat down at the kitchen table without turning on a single lamp, and I let the darkness gather around me while I thought about those 3 voices, word for word. That was the thing I could not put down. A man who is afraid for his father does not speak in a script. Fear is messy. Fear stammers and repeats itself and forgets what it meant to say. What I had heard on that road was not fear. It was a rehearsal. And the only reason 3 grown people separated by hundreds of miles would arrive at the same 11 words is that they had spoken to one another first, decided what to say, and agreed on the performance before the curtain ever rose. I told myself I was a paranoid old man inventing villains out of grief. I almost believed it. But there is a thing that happens to a driver after enough years on the edge, a sense that lives in the body rather than the mind. And mine was screaming now the way it used to scream a half-second before a crash I could not yet see. My old coach, a hard Sicilian named Bruno who had buried more drivers than he could count. once told me something I never forgot. He said, "Vincenzo, the track will always tell you the truth, but only if you are humble enough to listen before it kills you." I had been humble on the track my whole life. I had never once thought to be humble inside my own family. Marcus arrived first, the next morning, in a car that cost more than most people earn in 2 years. I watched him through the front window as he stepped out, smoothing his jacket, checking his reflection in the tinted glass, composing himself the way an actor does in the wings. My eldest son, 38 years old, a man who managed other people's fortunes in Los Angeles and had learned somewhere along the way to see human beings as columns in a ledger. He had his mother's dark eyes and none of her warmth, and as he came up the path, he arranged his face into an expression of tender concern that did not reach those eyes at all. He embraced me at the door. "Dad," he said softly, "I am so sorry. How are you feeling?" And while his arms were around me, while his voice was breaking with exactly the right amount of emotion, I felt his chin lift over my shoulder, and I knew with the certainty of 40 years of reading men, that he was not looking at me. He was looking past me, into the house. He smelled of expensive cologne, and underneath it something else. Something sharp and anxious that no cologne could hide. "Come in," I said. "Sit. I will make coffee." He came in, but he did not sit. He drifted. That is the only word for it. He moved through the front room with his hands clasped behind his back like a buyer at an estate sale, pausing at the things that caught his eye. He paused at the trophies on the long shelf, the heavy crystal and gold of 2 world championships and 100 smaller victories, and I saw his gaze travel over them, not with pride, but with appraisal, calculating. He paused at the painting Eleanor had loved, the one she had bought at auction the year we were married, and he tilted his head as though estimating what it might bring. He paused at the doorway to my study, where the real documents were kept, and lingered there a half-second too long before catching himself. "How is the academy, Dad?" he asked, still not looking at me. Still going. I said, "The kids keep me young." He made a small sound that might have been agreement and might have been contempt. "You know," he said, "you really should think about slowing down. At your age. With everything." He let the sentence trail off the way men do when they want you to finish the dark thought yourself. I poured the coffee. Black. 1 sugar. The way I have taken it for 50 years. And I watched my son wander my home like a man taking inventory of a place he expected to own very soon. And I felt something cold and quiet settle into my chest that had nothing at all to do with any disease. There is a particular skill in racing that the great ones share and the rest never learn. It is the ability to read another driver's intentions from the smallest of signals. The angle of his car a corner before he commits. The tightening of a line that tells you he is about to attack. I had been the best in the world at reading the men who tried to beat me. I had stared down rivals at 180 miles an hour and known their next move before they made it. I had built an entire life on the certainty that no one could deceive me on the track. And yet here, in my own kitchen, in the warm, ordinary light of morning, with my firstborn son sipping coffee and pretending to grieve a death that had not even arrived, I understood something that shamed me to my bones. I had spent 30 years reading other drivers. How in God's name had I missed the signs in my own son? Sienna came in the afternoon, and watching her arrive was like watching a professional take the wheel after an amateur has stalled at the lights. Where Marcus had drifted and lingered, my daughter moved with purpose. She swept up the path in dark glasses perched like a crown, a canvas bag of groceries on each arm, and she was talking before she even reached the door. Her voice pitched to that warm, practiced register she used on clients who needed to be charmed out of their better judgment. "Daddy," she said, setting the bags down and taking my face in both her hands. "Look at you. You look wonderful. You look strong. We are going to get through this together." She was 35 years old, my only daughter, and she had built a career out of making people believe things that were not quite true. She called it branding. She crafted images, polished reputations, told the world a flattering story about whoever was paying her that month. And as she stood there in my kitchen, telling me how wonderful I looked, when we both knew I was supposed to be dying, I understood that I had become her newest client. The product was grief, the campaign was devotion, and I was meant to be the audience too foolish to see the seams. Dominic arrived last, that same evening, and of the three he was the only one who looked the way a frightened son ought to look. He came through the door with his shoulders hunched, his eyes moving to the exits the way they always had since he was a boy. And when he hugged me, he held on a beat too long, too tight, as though he were the one who needed steadying. For one foolish moment, my heart softened toward him. The youngest, the anxious one. The boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms long after his brother and sister had outgrown such things. "Whatever you need, Dad," he whispered into my shoulder. "I am here. Whatever you need." And then, even as he said it, I felt his hand pat my back twice, briskly, the way a man pats a thing he is finished with, and his gaze had already slid past me to the hallway that led to the master bedroom, where Eleanor's jewelry still sat untouched in its box on the dresser. The softness in my chest went cold. Bruno used to say that the most dangerous corner on any circuit is the one that looks easy, the one that invites you to relax. Dominic had always been my easy corner. I made a note, somewhere deep and quiet, not to relax. For 5 days, the three of them performed. I have to give them credit. It was a flawless show. Marcus made coffee every single morning, black with 1 sugar, exactly the way I take it. A detail that startled me because he had not made me a cup of coffee in over a decade. Sienna cooked, filling the house with the smells of the meals Eleanor used to make, moving through her mother's kitchen with a borrowed tenderness that turned my stomach precisely because it was so well done. Dominic sat beside me in the evenings and asked if I was comfortable, adjusted the cushions behind my back, found things on the television and waited to be praised for finding them. To anyone watching through the window, it would have looked like love. 3 devoted children rallying around their dying father, setting aside their busy lives, their old grievances, their distance, to be present at the end. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece, and it made my skin crawl. Because not 1 second of it was real. I knew it was not real, the same way I had always known when a rival was carrying less fuel than he claimed. When a smiling sponsor was about to break a contract. When a track surface that looked dry was hiding a slick of oil through turn 9. The signals were small, but they never stopped. It was in the way their eyes wandered when they thought I was not watching, and I was always watching. While Marcus spoke to me of treatment options, his gaze would travel to the trophy shelf and do its quiet arithmetic. While Sienna asked me how I had slept, her fingers would trail along the frame of her mother's painting, testing it, appraising it. While Dominic massaged my shoulders, he would photograph the room with his phone, subtle little gestures of the wrist that he thought I could not see, cataloging the furniture, the cars visible through the window, the contents of a life. They were not nursing a dying man. They were taking inventory of an estate. I had spent 30 years on circuits all over the world, and I had learned that there is a specific kind of opponent you fear most, not the reckless one, who will eventually crash on his own. The patient one, the one who sits calmly in your mirrors lap after lap, doing nothing, waiting for you to make a single mistake so he can pounce. My children had become that opponent. They had settled into my home, calm and patient and smiling, and they were waiting. On the 5th evening, I sat in my own living room, surrounded by my own furniture and my own photographs and 40 years of accumulated life, with my 3 grown children attending to me like nurses in a hospice. And I felt more completely alone than I had since the morning I found Eleanor's note. I thought of all the races I had won by reading the intentions of strangers at lethal speed, and I realized, with a clarity as cold and bright as a winter morning at the track, that the most important read of my entire life was happening right here, at walking pace, in my own house. The drivers had changed. The stakes had changed. But the most unsettling part was not that they were circling me. It was that I still did not know, after 5 days of watching, which of my own children was actually steering the car. The question came on the 5th night, over dinner, in the casual tone a man uses to ask about the weather. We were at the long table Eleanor and I had bought in Tuscany 40 years ago, the 4 of us, with Sienna's roast chicken cooling on our plates and the candles she had insisted on throwing soft shadows up the walls. It was Marcus who spoke. Of course. I had known it would be him. He set down his fork with deliberate care, dabbed his mouth with his napkin, and looked at me with an expression of such tender, reluctant concern that for half a heartbeat even I almost believed it. "Dad," he said, "I hate to bring this up. I really do. But somebody has to, and I would rather it be me than have you worried about it. Have you given any thought to the estate, to getting your affairs in order, just so we can help you plan things properly?" From the kitchen doorway, Sienna chimed in right on cue, her voice gentle as a hand on a fevered brow. "We do not want you stressed about paperwork. Daddy, you should be focusing on your health, on resting. Let us carry that burden for you." And Dominic, beside me, added in a murmur he meant to sound offhand, "Does he even keep a will here? Or is it all with some lawyer somewhere?" He said it almost to himself, the way a man lets slip a thought he has been turning over too long. And I have spent my whole life listening for the things people do not mean to say aloud. I picked up my water glass. I took my time. I have learned that silence is its own kind of instrument, that a pause held 1 second longer than comfortable will pull the truth out of a room the way a long straight pulls the top speed out of an engine. I let it stretch. And then I set the glass down, and I said the 4 words I had been saving. I have not signed anything. The change was instantaneous, and it was total. I had seen it before, years ago. The moment a rival realizes the gap he was counting on has closed, and the corner is upon him, and there is no longer any way to make it through clean. That same flash of pure animal calculation crossed all three of their faces at once. Marcus's smile froze on his lips like paint on a wall. Sienna's hand stopped halfway to the wine bottle and hung there in the candlelight. Dominic went absolutely rigid beside me, the breath catching in his throat. For one long, ringing moment, the warmth drained out of the three faces I had watched come into the world, and what was left underneath was cold and impatient and terribly, terribly hungry. I want to tell you what that felt like, because I am not sure I have the words for it even now. Eleanor used to talk about the way a perfect engine sounds, that smooth singing note when every part is doing exactly what it was built to do. And she said you only truly hear it in the instant it breaks, when a single cracked component throws the whole machine into a scream, and the beautiful sound becomes a death rattle in the space of a single rotation. That is what happened at my table. I watched the love drain from my children's faces like oil pouring out of a cracked engine, fast and dark and impossible to stop. And I heard, somewhere down in my chest, the machine of my family throw a rod and begin to tear itself apart. "Oh," Marcus said, recovering first. He was always the quickest. "Of course, Dad. There is no rush. We just want to help when you are ready. That is all. We only want what is best for you." But it was too late. The mask had slipped, only for a second, only long enough, and I had seen the face beneath it. And once you have seen a man's true face at speed, you can never again be fooled by the one he wears in the pits. They tried to repair it. They were professionals, after all. Sienna laughed too brightly and refilled everyone's wine and steered the conversation to old memories. The family trip to the lake, the summer I taught them all to drive on the back roads behind the vineyard. Dominic recovered enough to clear the plates. Marcus told a story about his children that may even have been true. The candles burned down. The performance resumed, but I was no longer in the audience. I sat at the head of my own table, nodding, smiling, playing the gentle dying father they needed me to be. And inside I was as still and cold and focused as I had ever been on a starting grid. Because something had shifted in me that I could not undo. These were my children. I had held each of them in my hands within hours of their birth. I had taught them to ride bicycles on the gravel drive, had stayed up through their fevers, had sat in stands at school plays and graduations and weddings with my heart so full I thought it would burst. I knew the exact weight of each of them as infants against my chest. I knew the sound of their first words, and I no longer recognized a single one of them. That is the cruelest thing grief never warns you about. It is not the dying. I had made my peace with dying long ago, somewhere around turn 1 at 200 miles an hour with a wall on either side. It is the moment you look across a dinner table at a person you made, a person you would have given your life for without a second thought, and you realize you are looking at a stranger. A stranger who has put on your child's face the way an actor puts on a costume. A stranger who is, very patiently and very politely, waiting for you to die. And the worst of it, the thing that kept me awake long after the house went dark that night, was a single cold certainty. This was not the end of their performance. It was only the intermission. It was nearly 9:30 that same night when I heard my son's voice where it had no business being. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, moving quietly the way you learn to move in a house full of sleeping children. A habit that never leaves you even after the children are grown and gone. And as I passed the hallway that runs to the back of the house, I heard it. Marcus. Low and urgent. The particular hush a man uses when he is saying something he knows is wrong. The voice was coming from the garage. I want you to understand what the garage means to me. It is not a room where I keep cars. It is the one place on this earth that is wholly mine and Eleanor's. The championship car is out there under a cover, and the old roadster we drove on our honeymoon. And along the back wall, her workbench, her tools, her engineering manuals, everything exactly as she left it the morning she died, because I had not been able to bring myself to move a single screwdriver. It is my chapel. And my son had taken his phone call into it the way a thief takes a flashlight into a vault. I stopped in the dark hallway with my hand on the doorframe and I listened. "We need to move faster," Marcus was saying. "He is getting suspicious. I can feel it." No, listen to me. The cleanest way is emergency guardianship. We get a physician to certify cognitive decline, diminished capacity, the whole picture, and a judge signs it through in a matter of days. Once that is in place, he cannot sign anything. He cannot move anything. He cannot stop anything. We control all of it. There was a pause while whoever was on the other end spoke. I stood frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs the way it used to slam on the grid in the final seconds before the lights. That old familiar flood of adrenaline I had not felt in 20 years. Then Marcus again. Lower still. I know it is fast. That is the point. We do it before he wakes up and lawyers himself. Yes. I have someone. He has done this before. He knows exactly how to make it stick. His name is Julian Vosberg. You will want to talk to him directly. Julian Vosberg. I did not know the name then. It meant nothing to me. Just two cold syllables floating in the dark of my own hallway. But I felt something move through me when I heard it. The way you feel a corner before you can see it. A tightening in the gut that tells you the track ahead has teeth. I would come to know that name very well. I would come to learn it the way a driver learns the one corner on the circuit that has already killed better men than him. The corner you respect or you die in. But that night it was only a whisper, and I was only an old man standing in his own dark house, listening to his firstborn son plan to have him declared insane. I did not open the door. I did not confront him. Bruno taught me long ago that the worst thing you can do, the very worst, is to show your rival you have seen his move before you are ready to answer it. So I turned around. I walked back to the living room on legs that did not feel like mine. I picked up the book I had been pretending to read, and I stared at the same page for 20 minutes without taking in a single word. And when Marcus finally came back inside and wished me a soft and loving good night, I wished him one back. Saturday morning, I saw the suitcases. They had brought them down early, before I came downstairs, and lined them up by the front door like luggage in a hotel lobby. Marcus's leather bag, Sienna's rolling case, Dominic's pack already on his shoulder. The performance, it seemed, was over. The intermission had ended, and they were not staying for the second act. I made my coffee. I took my time with it. I let the silence stretch the way I had learned to let it stretch, and I watched them shift their weight and glance at one another, And finally, Marcus could not bear it any longer. "We have to head out. Dad," he said, not quite looking at me. "Work. You know how it is." "I do," I said. "Thank you for coming." And that was when his composure finally cracked all the way through. Maybe it was the calm in my voice. Maybe a part of him had hoped I would beg. He turned his back to me, and he threw the words over his shoulder like a man dropping a match he does not care to watch ignite. "You know what? Dad, you are selfish. You are sitting on a fortune, and you will not sign one piece of paper. What? You want to take it all to the grave with you. Is that it?" Sienna said nothing. She crossed her arms and leaned in the doorway, and she let her brother's words stand, which told me everything. Dominic at least had the grace to look at the floor. And then, 15 minutes later, 3 expensive engines started in my driveway, one after another, and 3 sets of taillights slid away down the hill toward the highway, and not one of them looked back. No goodbye. No glance in the mirror. Just gone. Across the road, my neighbor Helen Ross was standing on her porch in her gardening coat, and she watched those cars leave the way. She watched everything in our quiet valley, with a small notebook in her hand and a pencil moving across it. Our eyes met. She did not wave. She gave me a single slow nod, as if she understood something I had not said out loud. And then she went inside. They drove away that morning, certain they had left a dying man behind to think about his sins. They had no idea what they had actually done. They had reached into the engine of a thing that had been idling, patient and quiet, for 7 months, and they had just released the brakes. I stood in my empty house for a long time after their taillights disappeared. Then I did the only thing that made any sense to me. I got back in the car, and I drove to the one man left in the world I trusted without condition. Samuel Okafor and I had been friends for 30 years. He had been the doctor for my old racing team back when we both still had something to prove. The man who stitched me up after the crash at Spa that should have ended me. The man who sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, holding my hand on the worst night of my life. He was 62 now, still working long after he could have retired, still keeping odd hours at the regional hospital outside town. I did not call ahead. I simply drove, the way you drive toward the only safe corner on a circuit that has turned against you. And I found his office light still burning on the 3rd floor at nearly 10 o'clock at night. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. "Coffee," he said. It was not a question. He poured 2 cups from a machine that had clearly seen better decades. Black, 1 sugar. Because he remembered. And he settled into the worn chair across from me that had molded itself to his shape over the years. And he said only one thing. "Tell me." So I told him. I told him all of it. The diagnosis from the young doctor with the careful face. The 3 phone calls and the 3 identical answers. The 5 days of performance. The coffee Marcus had not made me in a decade. The way their eyes had crawled over my home like surveyors marking a plot of land. I told him about the 4 words at dinner and the way the warmth had drained out of my children's faces. And then I told him about the garage, about the whisper in the dark. Emergency guardianship, cognitive decline. A judge who signs it through in days. A man named Julian Vosberg. Samuel did not interrupt once. He listened the way only a doctor of 40 years can listen. his face doing that careful thing where it sorts what it hears into categories you cannot see, the serious from the survivable. He refilled my cup without being asked, but when I said the name Vosberg, something happened. His hand paused over the pot, only for a second, only long enough for a man who has spent his life reading the smallest signals to catch it. Then he kept pouring as though nothing had moved at all. "You overheard your son say the name Vosberg," he said. Carefully, far too carefully. "I did," I said. He told whoever was on the phone that this Vosberg had done it before, that he knew how to make it stick. Samuel. Do you know that name? He did not answer me directly. And in 30 years of friendship, through every triumph and every disaster, Samuel Okafor had never once failed to answer me directly. He set the pot down. He laced his fingers together. He looked at me with eyes that had gone the color of slate after rain, gray and unreadable, and I felt the floor of the conversation shift beneath me the way a track shifts when a cloud passes and the temperature drops, and suddenly the grip you trusted is gone. "Vincent," he said, "before you do anything, before you hire a single lawyer, before you confront one of your children, before you so much as raise your voice, I need you to come in and let me run a full workup. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. I will clear my schedule." I stared at him. "Samuel, I already have the results. I have the scans. I have the diagnosis. I am dying. What is there to work up? Humor me," he said, and there was a flatness in his voice I had heard from him only a handful of times in 3 decades. The voice he used when there was no room left for argument. 7 o'clock. I will be waiting. It is Saturday night, I said. You are asking me to come in first thing in the morning for tests I have already had done. Why? What is it? What are you not telling me? Samuel. He stood. He walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot where my car sat alone under the lights. When he turned back to me, his face had arranged itself into an expression I knew well, but had never once seen aimed in my direction. It was the face he wore at funerals, the face of a man holding something he is not yet ready to set down. Come in tomorrow, he said again, gently now. 7 o'clock. Please, I wanted to push. I wanted to use 30 years of friendship as a lever and pry whatever it was out of him. But the thing about knowing a man that long is that you also know exactly when pushing will accomplish nothing. And this was such a time. So I said all right. 7 o'clock. And I left. The drive home took 23 minutes. I know because I watched every one of them tick past on the dashboard clock, my hands tight on the wheel, the dark vineyards sliding by on either side. Bruno used to say that the most dangerous part of any race is not the moment you can see the danger coming. It is the moment you sense it without yet understanding it. The half second when your body knows something your mind has not caught up to. That was the feeling that rode home with me in the passenger seat that night, because in 30 years, Samuel had never lied to me. But sitting in that office, watching his face close like a door against me, I had understood for the first time that there was a great and terrible difference between telling a lie and choosing not to speak. And whatever it was that my oldest friend had chosen not to say, It frightened me more than the cancer ever had. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the house Eleanor and I had built, and I listened to the silence where her breathing used to be. And at 6 in the morning, I gave up and drove to the hospital. Samuel had asked me to come at 7 for another test, and he had asked it with a face I did not like. The face of a man who has seen something on the monitor a lap before the rest of the pit wall sees it. He was waiting for me at a side door, not the main entrance, which was the first strange thing. He took me down a corridor to a small reading room where the X-ray images live, and there was another man there already. Younger, in a white coat, with the tired eyes of someone who has been up all night staring at pictures of the inside of people. Samuel introduced him as Dr. Iverson, the head of radiology, a man he trusted with his life, and now, it seemed, with mine. "Vincent," Samuel said, and he did not sit down, which frightened me more than anything a sitting man has ever said. "I want you to listen, and I want you to not say anything until I am finished. Can you do that?" I nodded. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly still. Strange. The things that steady a man. "I reran everything myself," Samuel said. "Last night. Blood work, the new scans, all of it. And then I had Iverson read the images cold, without telling him what he was supposed to find." He looked at the younger doctor. Iverson cleared his throat and turned the screen toward me. The same gesture Reyes had made a few days before, in a different room, with a different meaning. "Mr. Castellano," he said, "there is nothing here. Your lungs are clear. Your blood work is that of a healthy man of 67. There is no tumor. There is no cancer. There is no disease of any kind that I can find. I want to tell you that I felt joy. I did not at first. What I felt was the floor tilting, the whole room going light. The particular dizziness of a man who has braced his entire body for an impact that does not come. I had spent days dying. I had called my children to my deathbed. I had begun, in the quiet hours, to make my peace with God. And now a tired young man was telling me, gently, that none of it was real. Then how? I managed. The first scans. Reyes showed me the scans. He showed me, "That," said Samuel, "is the part you need to hear sitting down." So I sat. What he told me took a long time, and I will give it to you the way I came to understand it, which was slowly, in pieces, over the days that followed. Dr. Reyes had done nothing wrong. He was an honest man, a careful man, and he had read the file in front of him and drawn the only conclusion that file allowed. The trouble was the file itself. The images Reyes had shown me, the scans of a cancer riddling my body, were not scans of my body at all. They belonged to someone else, some other patient, some other dying stranger, whose diseased lungs had been lifted out of their own record and dropped into mine. "It's in the system," Iverson said quietly. "The whole hospital network was compromised some weeks ago. There was an intrusion, the kind where someone gets inside the records themselves. Most of it looked like the usual mess. Files locked, ransom demanded. The sort of thing that's in the news every month now. But underneath that noise, Someone went into specific charts and changed them. Yours was one of them. We are still finding others. As of this morning, we believe there may be dozens of patients given diagnoses that were never true. Dozens. I would learn the real number later, and it would sicken me. But in that moment, I could only hold the one fact that mattered to me. Mine had not been an accident. A man does not break into a hospital's records and, by random chance, plant a fatal cancer in the chart of a man worth $58 million 7 months after his wife dies and 3 days before his children come circling. That is not chance. That is a targeting. That is someone reading the track ahead of me and laying the wreck exactly where they knew I would be. I sat in that little room with the images of a dead stranger's lungs glowing on the screen. And I felt something move through me that I had not felt in years. Not fear, not grief. Something older and colder and far more useful. I felt the calm that used to come over me on the grid in the last 60 seconds before the lights. When the noise dropped away and the world narrowed to a single clean line. Someone had decided I was going to die. Someone had told my children I was going to die, and my children had come home. All 3, within the same hour, saying the same words. The diagnosis was a lie, which meant the love might be a lie too, which meant I was not, after all, a dying old man surrounded by his grieving family. I was a healthy man surrounded by people who believed I was dying and who had perhaps been told so by the very person who arranged the lie. "Samuel," I said, and my voice was very steady. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me without asking why, the way I trusted you at Spa. I need you to tell no one that I am well, not the hospital, not the authorities, not anyone. As far as the world is concerned, Vincent Castellano is still dying." He looked at me a long moment, my oldest friend, and then he nodded slowly. "You're going to find out who did this," he said. It was not a question. "No," I told him. "I already know how this kind of race ends. I'm going to make sure they don't see me coming." Outside, the sun was coming up over the hills. For the first time in days, I was not afraid of it. I drove home with my own death folded against my heart, and I did not yet know that my wife had been waiting there for me the whole time. The house received me the way it always did now, silent and full of her absence. But I walked through it differently that morning. A dying man moves through his home like a guest. A man who has just been handed his life back moves through it like a detective. And everywhere I looked, I saw not furniture and photographs, but evidence, questions, the residue of a plan I had only begun to understand. I found myself standing in the doorway of the garage, her chapel, my chapel, staring at her workbench, and a memory surfaced that I had not touched in months. Eleanor had a saying. She had 100 sayings. My wife. She spoke in the language of the track even more fluently than I did. But there was one she repeated near the end that had always puzzled me. In those last weeks, when the headaches were bad and her hands had begun to tremble, she would catch my eye across a room and say it like a private joke between us. "Vincenzo, always check the oil before the final lap," and she would hold my gaze a beat too long. The way Samuel had held his hand over the coffee pot. The way people do when they are saying two things at once and waiting to see if you will hear the second one. I had always laughed and told her I had not checked my own oil in 40 years. That was what mechanics were for. I had thought it was the medication talking, or sentiment, or simply the strange poetry that comes to people when they sense the end approaching. I had never once thought it was an instruction. Now I stood in the garage, and I let those words turn over in my mind like a key in a lock that has finally found its door. Check the oil. I walked to the old championship car under its cover. I pulled the cover back, and I opened the engine, and I checked the oil, and there was nothing there but oil. I felt foolish. And then I understood that Eleanor had been an engineer, the most precise mind I have ever known, and she had never in her life said a thing she did not mean exactly. The final lap. Not the engine. The toolbox. Her toolbox sat where it had always sat. A battered red steel chest at the end of the bench, and at the very bottom of the deepest drawer, beneath a felt liner she had cut to fit by hand, was a false floor. My fingers found the edge of it. They were not steady now, and underneath it lay a brown envelope, soft and worn as though it had been handled many times, with my name across the front in her unmistakable hand. For Vincent. Only to be opened when I am gone. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of the garage, my back against the wheel of the car that had made us famous, and I broke the seal. The letter was 4 pages, written in blue ink, the handwriting growing shakier with each one. Some of the words were blurred where something had fallen on the paper, and I will never know whether it was her tears or, later, mine. Vincent. It began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am so sorry to leave you with what I am about to tell you. But I would rather wound you with the truth than protect you with a silence that could cost you everything. And then my wife, from the far side of the grave, told me what our children were. She wrote that she had grown ill the previous winter, a heart condition she had hidden from me because she did not want to frighten me. She wrote that one night, alone in the house while I was away at the academy. She had felt the attack begin, the crushing weight, the arm gone numb, and that she had managed to telephone each of our 3 children in turn. She wrote down what they said. Dominic told her that ambulances were expensive and she was probably just anxious, that she should lie down and rest. Sienna told her she always overreacted and to take something and call in the morning. Marcus did not answer at all. She wrote that she had lain on the kitchen floor for 2 hours until the worst of it passed on its own, and that in those 2 hours, listening to her own children decline to save her life, she had understood at last exactly who they had become and what they were waiting for. She had survived that night, but she wrote that she knew, with an engineer's cold certainty, that the next time she would not, and that they were counting on it. And near the end, in a hand I could barely read, she had written a single name she had found in Marcus's papers, a financial man he had begun meeting in secret, Julian Vosberg. Do not trust him, she wrote. Do not trust any of them. Protect Lily. And whatever comes, my love, do not let your mercy be the thing that finishes you. I do not know how long I sat on that floor. Long enough for the light through the high windows to move across the wall. I had heard people speak of a broken heart all my life, and thought it only a figure of speech. But I learned that morning that it is nothing of the kind. Something in my chest tore, slowly, fiber by fiber, and I bent forward over my wife's last words, and I wept the way I had not wept even at her funeral, ragged and helpless and alone. An old man on a cold floor, grieving everything at once. She had not simply left me a goodbye. She had left me a map. And the terrible, beautiful truth of it was only now becoming clear to me. The race had started months ago. I was only just now hearing the starting gun. I called Samuel at 1 o'clock in the morning, because some things cannot wait for a decent hour. And a man who has just learned his whole family may want him dead does not sleep anyway. I read him Eleanor's letter over the phone, the whole of it, my voice breaking in the places where hers would have. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Vincent," he said at last, "you cannot do this alone. I have watched you try to do everything alone since the day she died. And it nearly broke you. This will break you for certain. You need a crew." He was right. Of course. No driver ever won anything alone. The man on the podium gets the trophy. But behind him stand 20 people who built the car, read the data, called the strategy, changed the tires in 2 seconds flat while he sat there and steered. I had forgotten that. In my grief, I had been trying to drive a race with no pit wall and no crew, and a man cannot do that. Not at this speed. Not against this kind of opponent. So the next morning, I made 2 calls of my own, and by evening they were both sitting in the small office at the academy where I keep the trophies I no longer look at. The first was Teddy Calhoun, 70 years old now, with hands like old leather. But for 20 years, he had been the finest chief engineer I ever worked with. Teddy could find the lie in a car the way other men find their own front door. After he left the sport, he did not retire, because men like Teddy do not retire. He learned to read money the way he used to read telemetry, following the numbers backward to the truth. And he had spent the last decade as a forensic financial investigator. If there was a lie hidden in a ledger, Teddy would find it. The second was Grace Holloway. People in Sonoma know Grace as a lawyer, a quiet woman of about 50 with a careful voice. And she is a lawyer. But that is not the whole of her. Before the law, she had carried a badge. She knew how the machinery of justice actually turned, which doors opened and which stayed locked. And most importantly, she knew the people who could turn that machinery once we had something real to hand them. That last part mattered more than I understood at first. "Before we go one step further," Grace said, when I had laid it all out for them, the diagnosis and the scans and the letter, "you need to understand something. Vincent, you are not the only victim of what was done to that hospital's records. The intrusion is already under investigation, and it is not local police handling it. A thing like this, crossing state lines, hitting medical data, it goes to the federal level. There is an agent named Celeste Ashford who has been working it for weeks, and there is a detective here, Owen Greer, who caught the local end of it. I know them both. They are good. They are already pulling on this thread." I sat with that for a moment. "Then why do they need me?" They don't need you," Grace said. "But they need what you can get. Right now they have a hospital full of corrupted files and no idea who paid for it or why. They have a crime with no motive attached. You are the motive. Vincent, you are the man who was supposed to die so that someone could take $58 million. If you can hand them the why, and the who, and the proof, Then everything they are doing and everything we are doing snaps together into one case. But it has to be done their way. It has to be clean, or none of it stands up. That was the moment the whole thing changed shape for me. Until then, if I am honest, a part of me had wanted blood. A part of me had wanted to do this with my own two hands, the way a wronged man dreams of doing it. Grace took that dream and set it gently aside. But justice or revenge? Vincent, Teddy said, watching me with those pale old eyes that had read 1,000 engines. You can have one. You cannot have both. Choose now, because the two roads go in different directions, and there is no coming back to this fork. I thought of Eleanor. I thought of the words she wrote on every card. Onward, not backward. I thought of Lily, who would have to live in whatever world I left behind. And I thought of 14 families I did not yet know about, who were owed something I had it in my power to give them. Justice, I said. We build the case. We hand it to your agent and your detective on a silver platter. Every piece of it, so clean that no lawyer alive can take it apart. And when the time comes, they walk through the door. Not me. I looked at the two of them. My crew. The only people left in the world I trusted. But we run the race our way. We read the track. We find the weakness in each of them. We let them think they are winning right up until the last corner, and then we let the law take the checkered flag. Grace smiled. The first real smile I had seen from her. Now you're thinking like someone who plans to win, she said. She took out her phone. I'll call Ashford in the morning, quietly, from here on. Everything we find, we document, we date, we keep clean enough to put in front of a jury. Teddy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark shapes of the cars in the Academy lot. We start with the money, he said. We always start with the money. Show me where a man's money goes, and I will show you what is in his heart. He turned back to me. Give me 3 days. By Wednesday I will know things about your eldest son that he has spent years making sure no one would ever know. 3 days. I had spent 30 years waiting for a green light. I could wait 3 more days. But God helped them all when it turned. Teddy brought me the first of it on a Wednesday evening, in an envelope thick enough to be a book. It was not a book. It was a body count. And every page of it had my eldest son's fingerprints on it. We spread it across the desk in the Academy office while the rain came down outside. The kind of hard autumn rain that turns the windows to running glass. Teddy had worked fast. The way he always worked. The way he used to rebuild a gearbox overnight so I could race in the morning. And what he had found in a single week of pulling threads was enough to make me sit down slowly in my chair. The way you sit down when your legs have stopped consulting you. Marcus, it turned out, had not been managing fortunes. He had been devouring them. The fund he ran in Los Angeles. The one he spoke of at dinner parties with that easy confidence. The one that paid for the car that cost more than most people earn in 2 years. Was not what he told his clients it was. Teddy laid the documents out for me one at a time. And being a man who spent 30 years in trust no deeper than a handshake, I understood enough of it to feel sick. There were investment statements that showed steady, beautiful returns. Month after month, year after year. Returns that were the envy of everyone who saw them. And there were the real accounts, the ones underneath, that showed those returns had never existed at all. My son had been paying his older clients with the money of his newer ones. The oldest swindle in the world dressed up in a tailored suit. A house of cards built to look like a fortress. There were names. That was the part that undid me. Teddy had pulled a list of the people whose savings were tangled up in Marcus's invention, and they were not the wealthy speculators I might have been able to despise more comfortably. They were retirees, school teachers, a widow in Pasadena who had handed my son the entire proceeds of her late husband's life insurance because Marcus had sat in her living room and held her hand and told her he would treat her like family. There was a couple in their 70s who had wanted only to leave something to their grandchildren and would now leave them nothing but the debt of having trusted the wrong man. 14 families. Teddy had circled the number in red. 14 families, an average of $80-some thousand each, gone into the engine of my son's appetite and burned for fuel. I turned the pages slowly, the way I used to review a contract Eleanor had warned me about, and somewhere around the 8th page I had to stop and walk to the window and stand there with my back to the room until I could breathe again. I had spent 30 years helping families protect what they had built. That was the truth of my second life. The part the cameras never cared about. The academy. The foundations Eleanor and I quietly funded. The kids we pulled off the street and put into go-karts and turned into people with a future. I had spent the back half of my life trying to give, and my own firstborn son had spent his learning to take, and to take from precisely the people least able to survive being taken from. The old, the trusting, people exactly like the man his own father had become. Those are someone's parents, I said to the window. I did not realize I had spoken aloud until Teddy answered me. They are, he said quietly. Every one of them. I thought of the widow in Pasadena holding Marcus's hand. I thought of how good he was at it. The warmth, the eye contact, the borrowed sincerity. I had watched him do the very same thing in my own living room not 2 weeks before, holding my hand, telling me he only wanted what was best for me, and I understood with a fresh wave of cold that the performance he had given at my deathbed was not a special occasion. It was his trade. He had simply turned the family rate on his own father. Bruno used to say that you can tell everything about a driver by what he does when he thinks no one is watching the data. On the track, in front of the crowd, anyone can look like a hero for a lap or two, but the telemetry does not lie. It records every lift, every cheat, every corner he cut when he thought the eye in the sky had blinked. Marcus had spent his whole life believing no one was reading his telemetry, and now it was all here, on my desk, in Teddy Calhoun's careful hand. Every cut corner of an entire stolen decade. We locked the file in the cabinet, and Teddy pocketed the key. And as he pulled on his coat, he paused at the door. Rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Vince, he said, I have to ask, knowing what you know now, can you still go through with it? The slow way, the patient way, letting him drive onto the track of his own free will. Because once we start showing you the other two, it is only going to get harder. I looked at the locked cabinet. I thought of 14 families, and a widow in Pasadena, and a woman dead on a kitchen floor for the price of an ambulance. Harder, I said, but not less necessary. Show me the other two. Because the thing I had not told Teddy, the thing I had only just begun to understand myself, was that this had stopped being about my estate the moment I read the first name on that list. My son was not a greedy boy who had lost his way. He was a predator who had been hunting for years, and the only difference between his victims and me was that I had survived long enough to read the file, and there were, I already suspected, far more files to read. Wednesday came and went and gave me Marcus. Thursday gave me the other two, And it gave them to me harder, because betrayal from the strong is one thing, but betrayal from the weak cuts a different way entirely. Grace arrived at the academy that morning with a single photograph in a plain folder, and she set it on the desk in front of me without a word. The way a surgeon lays down the thing she is about to tell you she found. I looked at it for a long time before I understood what I was seeing. It was my daughter, Sienna, in a restaurant I did not recognize, somewhere with low gold light and white tablecloths, leaning across a small table toward a man. The man had silver at his temples and an expensive, unhurried face, and the way the two of them sat told me everything before Grace said a single word. This was not a business meeting. People do not lean toward each other like that across a conference table. They lean like that when there is something between them that the rest of the world is not meant to see. "Who is he?" I said, though some old instinct in me already knew the answer would matter more than the question. His name," Grace said quietly, "is Julian Vosberg. And before you ask, yes. He is the man your son named in the garage." I sat back in my chair. The room seemed to tilt the way it had in that hospital reading room. Sienna, my daughter, who as a little girl used to ride on my shoulders through the paddock and call me the fastest man in the world. Sienna had been sitting in golden restaurants with the man who paid to have a cancer planted in my chart. "How long?" I asked. Teddy answered this time, from his chair by the window, his pale eyes steady on me. "Best we can tell, going on 2 years. And it is worse than an affair. Vincent. We followed the money, the way we always do. For 2 years, small pieces of this family's business have been flowing to accounts that trace back to Vosberg, appraisals of Eleanor's collection that somehow reached him before they reached you, quiet copies of financial documents. Sienna has been feeding him the map of everything you own, room by room, account by account, for 2 years. She did not just fall in with the man. She handed him the keys. I have made my peace with many hard things in this life. I have buried friends who died in front of me at 200 miles an hour. I buried my wife. But sitting in that small office, learning that my own daughter had spent 2 years quietly handing a predator the blueprint of everything Eleanor and I had built, I felt something in me go very quiet and very cold. Not rage. Rage is hot, and hot is slow. This was the cold thing, the racing thing, the part of me that gets calmer the more dangerous the corner becomes. "And Dominic," I said. Grace and Teddy exchanged a look, and Grace slid a second folder across the desk. This one was thicker. Dominic, it turned out, was drowning. He had a gambling problem, a real one, the kind that does not leave a man room to breathe. He owed money to people who do not send polite letters, and the number was large enough that I understood at once why a frightened, weak man might let himself be talked into something monstrous by his older brother and his sister. $80,000. That was the size of the hole my youngest son had dug for himself. $80,000 to men who break more than promises. And here, God forgive me, the cold racing part of my mind saw a door and walked through it. "I'm going to lend him the money," I said. Teddy frowned. "Vincent, all of it. $80,000. But not as a father slipping cash to his boy. I am going to do it properly. A formal loan. A signed acknowledgement of debt. Dated. Witnessed. Every line of it. Grace, you draw it up so it would stand in any court in the country. I want Dominic Castellano to sign a document, in his own hand, that proves beyond any argument that he came to his dying father, the father he was helping to defraud, and took $80,000 from him. Grace looked at me, and slowly understanding came into her face, and then something close to admiration. "You're not saving him," she said. "You're documenting him." "I'm doing both," I said, and I meant it, which is the strange and terrible truth of it. I did want to save Dominic, even then, even knowing. He was my son. But I had learned a hard lesson by then. The lesson that the most dangerous thing you can do to a weak man is help him without a record. Because the weak forget the help and remember only the wanting. So I would help him, and I would keep the receipt. "Every piece of this stays clean," I added, looking at Grace. "Your way, dated, witnessed, ready for Ashford. When the time comes, I want the law to be able to stand up in front of a jury and lay it all out without a single thread they can pull loose." Teddy gave a low whistle. "2 years he had with your daughter. A pile of debt he had with your son. He thought he was reading this family like a book." He stood and came to the desk and looked down at the photograph of Sienna leaning toward Vosburg in the golden light. He never once stopped to wonder whether the old man at the center of it might be reading him right back. I picked up the photograph and looked at my daughter's face one more time. And then I set it down. They all thought I was the one strapped helpless to the bed, waiting for the end. But I had spent 30 years learning a single truth that none of them had ever had to learn. The one who looks like he is about to crash is sometimes the one holding the stopwatch. Of all the things they showed me in that small office, the last folder was the one that broke something open in me that I have not been able to fully close since. Grace did not slide this one across the desk. She held it a moment, watching my face. The way you watch a man before you tell him the corner ahead is worse than the last one. Then she set it down gently and said, "I think you should sit very still for this, Vincent, because you already know this man. You have known him for 25 years. You just didn't know you were looking at him." She opened it to a photograph, old and yellowed at the edges, and the breath went out of me. It was a picture from the paddock, 25 years gone. There I was, younger, in my racing suit, an arm thrown around the shoulders of a thin boy of perhaps 18, a mechanic's son. I remembered him now, the memory rising up out of the deep water where I had let it sink. He had hung around the garage that season, hungry-eyed, asking me 100 questions a day about racing and about winning. Always about winning. He had a gift for numbers and a hardness in him even then. And I, who had everything that year, 2 championships and the whole world calling my name, had taken a liking to the boy and had helped him, paid for some schooling, made some calls, set a clever, hungry kid on the road to a better life. His name was Julian Vosburg. I made him, I said. The words came out of me like something being pulled. I helped him. I gave him a start. You gave him more than a start, Teddy said quietly. You gave him the idea of who he wanted to be. And then, somewhere along the way, you took it back. I looked at him. What do you mean? Grace turned to another page, a transcript, and a printout of an old letter, my own signature at the bottom of it. And the memory came back to me whole, and it was worse than I wanted it to be. The boy had come to me, years after that photograph, no longer a boy. He had wanted in. He had wanted me to back him, to vouch for him, to bring him into the part of the sport where the real money lived. And I had said no. I had said it kindly. I told myself at the time. But I remembered now the look on his face, and there had been nothing kind in how it landed. I had told him he did not have it, that what made a champion was something you could not buy or learn, that he had the hunger but not the soul for it. I had patted him on the shoulder and sent him away, and I had not thought about him again for 20 years. I had forgotten him completely. He had not forgotten me for a single day. After you turned him away, Grace said, he went into money instead of racing, and he was very, very good at it. But he didn't build wealth the honest way. He found something better. He found old champions, men and women who had stood where you stood, who had money and pride and grown children who resented them, and one by one, he took them apart. She laid out the others, the way she had laid out the 14 families a day before. A retired ball player in Arizona, his accounts hollowed out by his own sons. An old actress in the hills, declared incompetent and stripped of everything. A singer in Nashville who had died. The file noted carefully, under circumstances that no one had been allowed to examine too closely. He has been hunting champions for a decade. Vincent, turning their own children into the weapons. You are not his first. You were going to be his finest. The transcript was the worst of it. It was a recorded call. Vosberg talking to my son Marcus, and there was a line in it that I have not been able to get out of my head from that day to this. Vosberg, laughing softly, saying, "Your father taught me everything I know about winning." Marcus, he just left out the part where he said winning had rules. I went back and took that part out. I sat there a long time. Teddy did not speak. Grace did not speak. They let me sit with it, which was a kindness, because here was the thing I had to look at, and it was not a clean thing. I wanted, very badly, to believe that Julian Vosberg was simply evil, that he had come from nothing good and gone to nothing good, and that none of it touched me. But that is not what the folder told me. The folder told me I had taken a hungry boy and shown him a glittering thing called winning, and taught him to want it more than anything in the world. And then, when he came to claim it, I had looked him in the eye and told him he was not good enough to have it. I had lit the fire and then closed the door on the man it made. I did not make him a monster. A man chooses that for himself, and Vosberg had chosen it with both hands. But I had handed him the matches, and I had never once looked back to see what he did with them. I taught him how to win, I said finally, and my voice was not steady. I taught him to want it more than his own soul, and then I told him he wasn't worthy of it. I closed the folder. The hardest race a man will ever drive is against a former student who learned everything you taught him and threw away the only lesson that mattered. Teddy nodded slowly. So what do we do? Vincent, I stood up. Outside, the cars sat gleaming in the afternoon light. The cars I used to teach the young ones in. The ones who still had souls to keep or lose. I taught him how to win, I said. Now I am going to have to teach him how to lose. A trap is only as good as the bait, and the bait, Grace told me, had to be a number large enough to make a careful man careless. We chose the truth, or near enough to it. $58 million. That was what I was worth. What 40 years of winning and a lifetime of careful stewardship had built. And it was the number that had set this whole machine in motion in the first place. So we would use it. We would let it be known that the dying old man had finally decided what to do with his fortune, and that the decision was about to be made final, and soon. The genius of it, and it was Grace's genius, not mine, was that we would not tell the lie directly to Vosberg. We would tell it to him through the only channel he trusted completely. We would tell it to my daughter. Grace placed the call herself, posing as an attorney's assistant. Her voice pitched to the breathless register of someone who knows she is sharing something she should not. She reached Sienna and let it slip, with just the right amount of feigned indiscretion, that her father was liquidating everything, all 58 million, and signing it into an irrevocable charitable trust by the end of the week. That, after the signing, no court on earth could touch it. No family member could contest it. The money would be gone into a foundation forever, beyond reach. She apologized for speaking out of turn, said she assumed Sienna already knew, and hung up before my daughter could ask a single question. Then we waited and we counted. Bruno used to say that you learn the most about a man not from how he drives the corner, but from how fast he reacts when he realizes he has misjudged it. The panic reveals the soul. We had set a clock ticking the moment Grace hung up, and the speed of what came next told me everything about how desperate the people circling me truly were. It took 40 minutes. 40 minutes from the end of that call until Grace's phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not recognize. A message that had no business being sent to her at all, asking whether there was any way the trust signing might be delayed, whether the family might wish to contest it first. Julian Vosberg, who had no standing, no right, no legitimate reason on this earth to know anything about my estate, had been told by my daughter within the hour, and had been desperate enough to reach out himself. $58 million had made a patient predator move in broad daylight. What is greed, really? But the inability to lift off the throttle when every instinct should be screaming at you to brake. I had seen drivers die that way. Good drivers. Brave drivers. Men who carried too much speed into a corner they knew was beyond them, because the idea of lifting, of yielding, of being passed, was more unbearable to them than the wall. Vosberg was carrying too much speed now. He had heard the engine of $58 million about to vanish forever, and he could not lift. So we gave him a corner to crash into. Through the same careful channels, we let the date and the place take shape. The signing would happen at my home, in the evening, at the end of the week. It would be quiet, private. A frail old man putting his affairs in order at last with only a notary present. Too tired and too sick to involve lawyers or fuss. We made it sound like exactly the kind of moment a man like Vosberg dreams of. The soft, unguarded instant when everything is decided and nothing can yet be undone. We made it sound easy. Bruno had warned me my whole career about corners that look easy. And then, because I wanted no possibility of escape, we built the timeline like a vice. The signing was set for Friday evening, which meant that if Vosberg and my children wanted to stop me, to seize control before the fortune slipped away into a foundation forever, they would have to act before Friday. They would have to come to me. They would have to walk through my own front door, into my own home, and reveal in full exactly what they intended. On the one night I had chosen, at the hour I had set, surrounded by everything Grace and Teddy would have waiting. I was not merely baiting them anymore. I was setting their schedule. I was choosing the corner, the speed, the moment of the pass. For the first time since a young doctor with a careful face had handed me a death I did not own, I was no longer the one being driven. I had both hands on the wheel. The confirmation came 2 days later. Teddy intercepted it and brought it to me without a word, simply set his phone on the desk and let me read. Vosberg's office had called my children. An urgent family meeting was requested. Friday evening, a matter that could not wait. He had taken the date we offered him as though it were his own idea. The way a chasing driver takes the inside line you have deliberately left open, certain he is seizing an opportunity, never once suspecting it is the exact place you have decided to make him crash. I sat alone in the office that night after the others had gone, surrounded by the trophies of a younger man, and I thought about Eleanor, about her saying, near the end, with that look that held two meanings, always check the oil before the final lap. She had known, not the details, perhaps, but the shape of it. She had known there would be a final lap, and she had spent her last strength making sure that when it came, I would be ready to drive it. The track was laid, the bait was taken, the clock was running. All that remained was to let them floor it. It was a Wednesday night, just past 10 o'clock, when my phone lit up on the workbench, and I saw my granddaughter's name on the screen. Lily, 16 years old. The only one of them who had ever come to the garage just to sit with me while I worked. The only one who asked about Eleanor without first asking about money. I answered before the second ring. Grandpa. One word, and I knew. Her voice was small and shaking, the way a tire shakes a half-second before it loses grip. Grandpa, I need to tell you something, and I'm scared. I set down the wrench. I made my voice as calm as the day Bruno taught me that a frightened driver makes the car frightened too, and a frightened car kills you. I'm here, I said. Take your time. Tell me what happened. She told me. She had been upstairs at her mother's house, supposed to be asleep, when she heard Sienna on the phone in the hallway. Her mother had not known the bedroom door was open an inch, and Lily had heard a name she did not recognize then, but would never forget now. Julian Vosberg. She heard her mother say the word guardianship, slow and careful, the way you say a word you have practiced. She heard her mother say incompetent. And then she heard her Uncle Marcus, who had driven over that evening, say something from the bottom of the stairs that turned the whole house cold. He said it would all be simpler once the old man was out of the way. The old man. That was me. The man who had taught Marcus to ride a bicycle on the paddock asphalt, who had carried him on my shoulders through the pits at Monza when he was 4, who had cried at his graduation. The old man. Out of the way. I didn't know what to do. Lily said, and now she was crying, trying not to. The worst kind of crying, the kind a child does when she has decided she is too old to be allowed it. So Grandpa, I recorded it. I put my phone in my hoodie pocket, and I went and sat on the stairs like I was getting water, and I recorded the whole thing, the whole meeting. They were all there. Mom, Uncle Marcus, Uncle Dominic, and that man on speakerphone. I closed my eyes. I had spent 30 years training my body not to react to fear, to let it pass through me like air through a vent. And in that moment, all of that training nearly failed me. Not because of what they had said. I already knew what they were. I had read the files. I had heard the garage. No. It nearly failed me because of her. Because a 16-year-old girl had sat alone on a staircase in the dark and chosen the hardest thing a person can choose, which is the truth over your own blood. Lily, I said, listen to me very carefully. Are you safe right now? Where are you? She was at a friend's house, she said. She had told her mother she was staying over to study. She had left because she could not look at her anymore. Good, I said. That was smart. That was the smartest thing you could have done. I kept my voice level, a hand on her shoulder through the phone, because the last thing a person in a spin needs is the man beside them screaming, "I want you to send me what you recorded, and then I want you to stay exactly where you are tonight. Tomorrow morning a man named Teddy is going to call you. He is an old friend of mine, the best man I have ever known, and he is going to make sure you have somewhere safe to be that is not your mother's house. Will you let him do that?" She said yes. A moment later, my phone buzzed with the file. I did not play it that night. I am not ashamed to say I was not ready. I sat in the garage with Eleanor's tools hung in their neat silhouettes on the pegboard, and I held the phone in both hands the way you hold something that is both precious and radioactive. And I thought about my wife. Eleanor had written, in the letter hidden under the false floor not 10 feet from where I sat, that the only one worth saving in this whole sorry race was the youngest. "Protect Lily," she had written. "She has her grandmother's spine." At the time I had read it as a mother's wish. Now I understood it as a prophecy. Eleanor had seen, even from the far side of the grave, what the rest of us had missed. The girl had a spine. She had just proven it, alone, in the dark, with nothing but a phone and a conscience. Bruno told me once, in a wet pit lane at the old Österreichring with the rain coming sideways, that courage is not the absence of fear. Any fool can be brave when he is not afraid. Courage, he said, is being terrified down to the soles of your boots and keeping your foot where it belongs and your hands where they belong and holding the line anyway. I had built a whole life on that sentence. I had won championships on it, and a child had just lived it more purely than I ever had, because she had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and she held the line. I called Teddy. I told him I needed Lily somewhere safe by morning. No questions. Every resource. He did not ask why. He said, "Done." Then I sat a while longer with the unplayed recording in my hand, and I understood that the trap was no longer a plan. It was loaded. Every piece was in place, now the files, the letter, the loan, the bait, and now this. A child's voice carrying the truth out of that house. There was only one thing left. My own foot, my own hands, the final corner. And for the first time since the doctor said the word cancer, I was not afraid of it. I was ready for it. Friday came the way the green flag always came, slow in the waiting and then all at once. I spent the morning in the garage, not working, just sitting among Eleanor's tools, letting my hands be still on purpose for once in my life. A man prepares for the biggest race of his life, not by doing more, but by doing less. You eat a little. You breathe. You walk the line in your mind, corner by corner, until your body already knows the lap before the car has turned a wheel. So I walked it, the clinic that planted a lie, the garage where my son's voice had no business being, the letter under the false floor, the files, the recording on a 16-year-old's phone. Corner by corner, I drove the whole season again in the quiet of my workshop, and when I was done, I stood up and went to get ready for the last corner of all. By then it was no longer only my crew running the race. Grace had spent the week doing the thing she had promised me at the very beginning, the thing that mattered more than any of the rest. She had taken every piece we gathered, dated and witnessed and clean, and she had laid it in front of Agent Celeste Ashford and Detective Owen Greer, the two who had been working the hospital intrusion for weeks. They had their own warrant now. They had their own people. What they had been missing was the moment, the place and the hour when everyone we wanted would be in one room, saying the things we needed them to say where the law could hear it. That was the one thing I could give them that no warrant could. So this was no longer a trap I was springing alone. It was a coordinated thing, planned with the law, run by the law. With me as the bait and the stage both, Grace had thought of everything else. By 4 o'clock, the house had been dressed for the part it needed to play. In the front room, where Eleanor and I had hosted 30 Christmases, there was now a hospital bed, the real kind, rented and delivered that morning with a folded blanket and a rolling tray. There was an oxygen tank beside it, the clear tubing coiled like a sleeping snake. There was a monitor that beeped, slow and tired, the sound of a man running out of laps. Grace had even dimmed the lamps and drawn the heavy curtains, so the room sat in the gray half-light of a sick room, the light of a place where people come to take things from the dying. "You look terrible," Grace said, surveying me. From her, it was the highest compliment. The makeup artist she had brought had spent an hour making me into the old man my children expected, hollowing my cheeks with shadow, graying my lips, painting the blue of bad circulation under my eyes. She had taught me how to let my hand tremble on command, which, God help me, I did not need much teaching to do. When I looked in the mirror, I saw what they wanted to see. I saw a man with no more laps left in him. The notary was real, and that had been the law's doing as much as Grace's. "Everything in this room is a performance," Grace had told me. "Except the law. The law has to be real, or none of it holds." So Ashford herself had arranged it. The man who arrived just before 5, a calm officer of the court in his 60s named Mr. Abernathy, had been fully briefed by the agent before he ever set foot in my house. He knew exactly what he was walking into and exactly why. He was not an innocent prop wandered in off the street. He was a credentialed witness, placed there on purpose, instructed to do one thing and one thing only, which was to sit still, observe everything, and be able to swear later under oath to every word and every act that passed in that room. He understood that there were people outside, parked dark down the road, who would come the moment the signal was given. His calm was not the calm of a man who did not understand. It was the calm of a man who understood completely, and on the rolling tray, set out where the light from the one lamp would catch it, lay the pen, not just any pen, Eleanor's pen. The heavy black and silver fountain pen the team had given her the year I won my second championship, engraved along the barrel with the date and a single word she had chosen herself. Onward. She had signed every important paper of our lives with that pen. The mortgage on the first little house, the papers for the academy, the cards she tucked into my bag before every race. I had decided, sitting in the garage that morning, that when the moment came I would sign with her pen. Not the fake will, not the trust, something else entirely. But they did not know that yet. They arrived together at 6, which told me everything. People who have nothing to hide arrive separately and on their own time. People who have rehearsed arrive in formation. Marcus came first through the door, then Sienna, then Dominic, and behind them, hanging back at the threshold, the way a man hangs back who knows he does not belong inside, came Julian Vosberg. I had not seen him in 25 years. The hungry-eyed boy from the Mechanics' Bay was gone. In his place stood a tailored, silver-templed man with a soft handshake and a softer voice. He crossed the room to my bedside and took my trembling hand in both of his and said, "Vincent, it's been far too long. I'm so sorry to see you like this." And he smiled at me with my own lessons behind his eyes. "Julian," I said, and let my voice crack on the second syllable. You came all this way. Of course, he said. Family looks after family, Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and began to explain the documents. Marcus stood at my right shoulder, too close. His eyes fixed on the pen. The monitor beeped its slow, dying rhythm. Somewhere outside, parked dark down the road, were Ashford and Greer and the people who would come through that door the moment I gave the signal. All I had to do was reach out a trembling hand, pick up my wife's pen, and begin the last lap. So I did. I picked up Eleanor's pen, and the weight of it in my hand was the weight of 40 years. Onward. I let my fingers tremble over the document, Mr. Abernathy slid toward me. Let the children lean in. Let Vosburgh's soft eyes fix on the moving nib. And then I did the one thing none of them expected. I signed my name strong. Not the shaking scrawl of a dying man. The same clean, fast signature I had put on 30 championship contracts. The hand of a man whose nerve has never failed him at speed. Marcus saw it first. I watched the confusion move across his face like a shadow crossing a track. The signature was wrong. It was too steady. It belonged to a different man than the one in the bed. A Mr. Abernathy, I said, and my voice came out clear and full. No crack, no rasp. The voice that had once filled press rooms on 4 continents. Thank you for your patience, but I'm afraid I haven't signed a trust. I've signed a sworn statement, witnessed by you, an officer of the court, and I'd like the record to show the date and the hour. The room went very still. It was the second silence I had spoken of once, long ago, to no one. The silence of children realizing the old man might be worth more to them alive after all, and worth nothing at all if he was awake. I pushed back the blanket. I swung my legs over the side of the rented hospital bed, and I stood up. I will not pretend it was graceful. 67 years are 67 years, and a man who has broken as many bones as I have does not leap to his feet. But I stood, and I stood straight, and I reached up and pulled the oxygen tubing from my face and dropped it on the bed. And I wiped the makeup from under one eye with the back of my hand so they could see the color underneath. And I looked at the 4 people who had come to bury me while I was still breathing. The race isn't over, I said, until I crossed the line, and I just did. Dominic made a sound like something breaking. Sienna had gone the color of paper. But it was Vosburgh I watched, because Vosburgh was the only one in the room who understood, in that first half-second, exactly what kind of trouble he was in. And I saw the predator's calm settle over him, the search for the exit. I had taught him that calm. It was, I realized, the last of my lessons he had left to use. Vincent, he began, smooth as ever, rising from his chair. I don't know what you think you've... Grace, I said. She came in from the kitchen with a tablet in her hand, and behind her came Teddy, and the room understood that the old man had not been alone after all. Grace set the tablet on the rolling tray, next to Eleanor's pen, and she pressed play. It was Lily's recording. My granddaughter's frightened breathing under it, and then their own voices, unmistakable, filling the dim room. Sienna saying guardianship, Marcus saying it would all be simpler once the old man was out of the way. And Vosburgh's voice, soft and amused, laying out exactly how a compliant doctor would certify my incompetence. Their own words, in their own voices. In the room where they had spoken half of them. When it ended, no one moved. You should know, I said quietly. that nothing in this room is a surprise to anyone but you. Everything you have done, the 14 families Marcus ruined, the records Sienna fed to Julian for 2 years, the diagnosis he paid to have planted in my chart. All of it has already been gathered, dated, and handed to the people whose job it is to act on it. This was never a trap I sprung. It was the last piece of a case that was built weeks ago. Mr. Abernathy is here to witness the close of it. And he is not the only one waiting. That was when the headlights swept across the curtains. I had given the signal the moment I stood. A single word to Grace. And Grace had sent it on. They had been parked dark down the road for an hour. Agent Ashford and Detective Greer and the people who worked with them, holding warrants signed days before on the strength of everything my crew and the law had built together. They did not come because of a recording played in a sick room. The recording was simply the last thing the case had needed to be airtight. They came because the time had come, and the door opened, and the room filled with people who did not speak softly, who did not call me Dad, who said the words I had waited a very long time to hear someone with the authority to say to Julian Vosberg. He did not fight it. Of course he didn't. He was far too intelligent for that. As they turned him toward the door, he looked back at me, and there was almost something like respect in it. The look a driver gives the man who beat him clean. You taught me everything I know about winning. Vincent, he said. I know, I told him. I forgot to teach you how to lose. So let me teach you now. They took my children too. Marcus first, still arguing, still certain there was an angle, because men like Marcus believe to the last that there is always an angle. Sienna in silence, her composure finally, completely gone. And Dominic, who stopped in front of me, and for one moment the boy who used to fall asleep in the pits looked out through the wreckage of the man. And he opened his mouth, and nothing came out. And then he was gone too. And then the house was quiet, in a way it had not been since Eleanor died. I sat down on the edge of the rented bed, in the dim, sick room light, holding my dead wife's pen. An old man who was not dying after all, surrounded by the ruins of the family he had built, and the truth he had finally won. Teddy put a hand on my shoulder and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. Grace was already speaking quietly with Agent Ashford by the door. The line was crossed. The race was won. It did not feel like winning. The law moves nothing like a race. A race is decided in 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, clean and final, a flag and a podium and an answer. The law took 11 months. 11 months of depositions and motions and lawyers in gray rooms, of my own name read aloud in courtrooms, of sitting on hard benches while strangers in robes decided the fate of the children I had carried on my shoulders through the pits at Monza. No one tells you that winning the truth is only the beginning. The truth has to be proven again and again, slowly, to people who were not there, and every time it is proven, it costs you the price of living through it once more. Julian Vosberg was the first to fall, and he fell the hardest, because he had the furthest to fall and the most to answer for. It turned out the files Grace and Teddy had assembled were only the beginning. Once the authorities had a thread to pull, the whole tapestry came apart. There had been others before me. The retired ball player in Arizona, the old actress whose family had quietly emptied her accounts, the Nashville singer who died, they now suspected, with a great deal of help. Vosberg had spent a decade hunting men and women who had once stood on podiums and stages turning their own children into the instruments of their ruin, because he had learned the cruelest lesson of all, that the people closest to you can be made into weapons if you only show them what they stand to gain. He had learned it. I understood by then, partly from watching me, from a man who had taught him how to win and never once thought to ask what he would do with the winning. He did not look at me when they read the count of the years. It was a number large enough that he would not see the outside of a cell again, and he received it the way he received everything, with that smooth, terrible calm. Only once, as they led him out the final time, did he turn his head, and he found me in the gallery, and he did not say anything at all. He did not need to. We both knew. The student had finally learned the lesson the teacher had forgotten to give him. He had learned how to lose. My children took longer, and they took more out of me. Marcus fought to the end, because Marcus had never in his life believed there was a wall he could not talk his way around. He hired the best lawyers $58 million of other people's stolen money could buy, and they argued and delayed and filed. And in the end, none of it mattered, because Lily's recording was real, and Eleanor's letter was real, and the 14 families were real, and you cannot talk your way around 14 ruined families. He went away for the fraud and for the conspiracy, both. The last thing he said to me, through the glass, was that I had betrayed him, my son. Looking at me through glass and telling me that I was the one who had betrayed him. I did not argue. There is no arguing with a man who has built his whole soul on a lie. You can only grieve him the way you grieve the dead. Sienna pled. Her lawyers were wiser than Marcus's, and they saw early that there was no winning, only the size of the loss. She gave them Vosburg, what little of him she had left to give, and it shortened her sentence and lengthened her shame. She never apologized to me. I do not think she had the words for it. I think somewhere along the way she had traded the part of herself that knew how to be sorry for the part that knew how to calculate. And you cannot buy that part back at any price. And Dominic, my youngest, the one who used to fall asleep in the pits with engine grease on his cheek. Dominic broke first and broke completely. He told them everything before they even had to ask. He testified. He wept on the stand. Real tears. The first real thing I had seen from any of them in a year. And his lawyers used his remorse and his gambling addiction and his place at the bottom of the family ladder. And the judge, who was not a cruel woman, gave him the shortest sentence of the three. It was still a sentence. He still went away. But the night before he did, he asked to see me. And I went. We sat across a metal table and we did not say very much. There is not much to say. But at the end, he reached across the table and he put his hand near mine, not touching, just near, the way a child puts his hand near yours when he is afraid of the dark, but too proud to ask. And he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I know it doesn't fix anything. I just needed you to hear me say it before they take me." And I told him the truest thing I knew, which was that it did not fix anything, and that I forgave him anyway. Because forgiveness is not a thing you give people because they have earned it. It is a thing you give them so that you do not have to carry the hate. I had carried enough. The 14 families got their money back. That was the part of it that mattered. In the end, more than the sentences, Grace fought for it for months, and the courts traced what Marcus had hidden. And one by one, the widows and the retirees and the school teachers were made whole. The 70-year-old couple from Pasadena wrote me a letter I still keep in the garage. They did not know me. They only knew that the money that had vanished from their lives had come back, and they wanted to thank someone. And somehow my name had reached them. I read that letter many times that winter, alone in the house, in the quiet, with Eleanor's pen on the desk in front of me. And slowly, an idea began to take shape, the only thing I could think to do with a victory that had cost me everything and left me with $58 million and an empty house and no one to leave it to. I would build something that was hers. I did not give the $58 million to my children. I think you knew that already. But here is the thing none of them ever understood. Not Marcus with his funds, not Sienna with her calculations, not Vosberg with all his hunger. The $58 million had never been the point. It was never even mine. Not really. It was something Eleanor and I had passed through on our way to building the only thing that ever mattered, which was each other and the work. And the kids who came to the gate of the academy with grease under their nails and nowhere else in the world to go. So that is where it went. All of it. I called it the Eleanor Castellano Foundation, and I built it the way she would have built it, which is to say, without a single thing in it for show. There is no marble lobby. There is no wall of donor names. There is a working garage, the best one I could put together, with the finest tools and the finest instructors I could find. And there is a fleet of cars, and there is a simple rule carved into a plank of oak above the door, in her handwriting, copied from the last card she ever tucked into my bag. Onward. The foundation takes the kids nobody else will take. The ones who are too poor for the karting circuits where champions are supposed to be born. The ones with talent and no money and no father in the stands. It costs them nothing. Not the lessons, not the cars, not the entry fees, not the long road to a real seat in a real series if they are good enough and willing enough to chase it. We have sent 4 of them to professional teams now. The first one, a girl from Oakland who came to us at 14 with hands as steady as Eleanor's ever were, stood on a podium last spring in Europe. And when they handed her the trophy, she held it up and pointed at the camera and said, "This one's for the old man in California." I watched it alone in the garage, and I wept like a child. And I was not ashamed. People ask me, sometimes, the men my age who recognize the name, whether it was worth it, whether I would do it all again, knowing what it would cost me my children, my family, the picture of old age I had always carried, the one with grandchildren at the table and a son to take the wheel when my hands finally gave out. And I have thought about that question a great deal, in the quiet, with her pen on the desk in front of me. Here is what I have come to. There are 3 things a long life teaches a man, if he is paying attention. And I was not always paying attention. God forgive me. But I was paying attention by the end. The first is that the people who tell you what you want to hear are almost never the people who love you. Love is not soft. Love does not arrive in identical phone calls within 24 hours of money entering the picture. Love is the friend who drives across town at midnight and tells you a hard truth. Love is a 16-year-old girl alone on a staircase in the dark, terrified, doing the right thing anyway. Watch what people do when there is nothing in it for them. That is the only test that has ever told the truth. The second is that a man is not what he accumulates. I won championships. I made $58 million, and in the end, every dollar of it would have been handed to the people who came to bury me, if I had measured my life by the size of the pile. The pile is not the life. The pile is just the score. And the score, I promise you, God's honest truth, is not what they read out over you when you are gone. What I will leave behind is not in any bank. It is in a girl from Oakland on a podium in Europe. It is in 14 families who got their lives back. It is in a workshop full of kids who will never know my wife's face but will spend their whole lives standing under her name. And the third thing, the hardest one, is that forgiveness is not for the person who wronged you. It is for you. I forgave Dominic across a metal table not because he earned it, but because I am an old man and I have only so much road left, and I refuse to spend it carrying hate. Hate is the heaviest thing a man can carry, and it slows you in every corner, and at the end of the lap it is still there in your hands, having cost you the race and given you nothing. I let it go. I think, by the grace of God, I have nearly let all of it go. Some mornings I even believe it. Eleanor used to say that the sharpest turn decides the champion, that any fool can hold the wheel on the straight. But the corner, the hard, blind corner where everything in you is screaming to lift off, that is where you find out who a man really is. I was 67 years old before I drove my sharpest corner. It was not on any track. It was in a dim front room, surrounded by the people I had loved, deciding whether to be broken by them or to stand. And I stood. Not because I was brave, because she taught me how, and because the lesson held, the way a good lesson holds long after the teacher is gone. The race is won. The house is quiet. The girl from Oakland calls me on Sundays, and every morning I walk out to the garage and I check the oil before the final lap, the way Eleanor told me to, and I go to work. Onward. If this story moved you, if you have ever loved someone who turned out to want something from you, or stood your ground when it would have been easier to fold, or learned the hard way what your life was really worth, then do one thing for me. Tell someone you love that you love them today, plainly, with nothing in it for you. And if a story like this one matters to you, subscribe and stay, because there are more of them to tell, and I would be honored to have you here for the next lap.